Hey guys, Mineral here with another Overwatch League video. The 222 lock made its debut on the OWL stage last week, and if you caught the games, you probably witnessed quite a bit of bunker. We saw some healthy variation in terms of picks around the Orisa, but a comp we saw relatively often was the one featuring Roadhog and the Mei next to the Orisa. As such, I thought it would be interesting to do a quick breakdown on the comp, and especially on how the Mei wall fits into the mirror matchup. We have seen teams use it defensively like the Fusion does here, either to prevent follow-up once a teammate has been hooked, or to make the hook snap altogether. We have also seen teams use it offensively, either seeking to secure kills on their hooks or to prevent counterwalling. For instance, here the Dynasty follow up their own hook with a wall on the Roadhog in an attempt to secure the kill. They execute the play pretty well, and even though they lose the fight, they end up forcing out 4 ultimates out of the shock for just one of their own. And that's exactly why the pull hook Mei combo is so interesting to look at, because virtually every fight in the mirror matchup will start with teams attempting to execute these plays. A successful attempt will either immediately win you the fight and secure a pick, or force the enemy to blow their resources first to salvage the situation, either in form of crucial cooldowns or even ultimates. Now, I thought this extended fight between the Fusion and the Charge offered a good example of this. It's a fight which features a couple of creative attempts from both sides and several pull hook wall rotations before something finally lands and all hell breaks loose. Let us dig into the fight. Alright, so let's take a look at this fight. First off, we had some ult exchanges here. Eventually, the Charge's soft reset, and this is where the next exchange of the pull hook combo is gonna essentially be. So as soon as the shield goes down, that's when Rio and Hotbar are looking for it. You can see the trio over here. They're all looking to set the play up, and they're first. And that's very important, because when you're first, then you can force your enemies to react. Sato fires out his as well, but it's going to be very difficult for Poco to ever follow up on a pull hook when he's already going to be mid-air. And as such, EQO just goes for a pretty standard counter wall. Anytime you're getting pull hooked first, this is what you want to look for. And as a result, if you look at Hotbar's POV, no way for him to actually hook this. So very standard way to use it defensively anytime you're being executed on first. Now, because the Charge actually went first, you end up in a situation where Poco never actually got to throw out his hook. And it's very, very important for both the Orisa and the Hawk to be in sync with this cooldown. Now, you also don't want to end up not using the hook. So Poco ends up throwing it out now. But really, so first of all, the Charge obviously understand that they don't have a shield, and there's still the threat of the hook from Fusion because they haven't used it. So they're very well aware of this. But as soon as this misses, now you've put your cooldowns extremely out of sync if you are the Fusion. If you take a look at Poco here, 6 seconds on his hook and 3 seconds on the pull. So 3-second window where Fusion can't really go for a pull hook, whereas Rio and Hotba, they're both in sync, they're ready to go in 2 seconds. So as soon as the hook misses, Rio's shield is coming back up, they're going for another rotation here. Obviously, we also have a fight for high ground going on here with both pharmacies, but really this is what we're interested in. This is the kind of bread and butter of the fight. Now, this is where it gets a little creative, and I like the offensive wall by the Charge here. Let's take a look at what they do. So they understand their window. They understand that there's no threat of the hook for another, let's see, another 4 seconds. So they're very, very aggressive here, looking for this. And you can see the Charge starting with a wall. Now, again, very interesting concept here, because usually when you put down a wall, you want it to secure kills or to use it defensively. But again, Charge know that this is their window. They won't need this wall defensively as long as they can execute on a pull hook. Now, what does this wall accomplish? It accomplishes several things. First of all, it puts you in a position where Rio can throw his ball above the wall, and most of the members of Philly Fusion won't even see it. As you can see, they have no LOS on the ball, so it's gonna surprise them. It's gonna be very difficult for them to dodge this pull. And as long as the pull is high enough, Hotba should be able to hook it as well. So and another thing you also do is obviously EQO. He has his wall coming up. but it's going to be much more difficult for him to counter wall defensively, simply because he also doesn't see the pull coming and there's already a wall in the way, right? Like in general, you would see pull hook comes out, team member gets hooked, then you wall to kind of protect him. So you can see pull, very huge. And if we look at EQO's POV, no way he can ever counter wall here. If this hook lands, no way they can ever counter wall here effectively. At least not to the point where it's going to save anyone. Now the unfortunate thing is Hotpa misses this hook. You can see this little hitch that he goes for. This little hitch to the right. This messes up his hook, which really costs him a lot because this should be a free kill. You can see it just misses. And if we also look at Sado, he didn't even use Fortify here. Again, why didn't he use Fortify? Because normally in a situation like this, you would try to use it, try and block the hook, because he doesn't even see this coming. No one sees this coming because of how creative the wall is from the charge. So really smart setup by Nero and Rio here. Very good execution. The pull is certainly high enough to the point where obviously you don't want Nero's wall to snap your own hook. So really good setup here. Just unfortunate that Hotpa messes this up. And you can see actually from the side of VQO, he just puts down a blind wall trying to block it. But this surprises him and he kind of has to act, he has to react to it rather than actually seeing the play developing. That's why you see the wall just completely useless, wouldn't block anything. So good try by the charge. Unfortunately, they don't execute. Now you've blown all of your cooldowns, you kind of have to fall back and wait for the next rotation, because now you've ended up in a situation where you almost got value out of your play, but now both Sado and Poco, they both have their pull combo. So now you have to run and make sure this doesn't convert. Remember, there's no divas on either side, so pull hooks are generally free. The pull comes out, but the charge, they just barely dodge it. Pull positioning of the pull kind of iffy. You do have a wall here. You obviously know that the charge won't go around this way. They're just going to try and cut the corner. Could have put it a little closer here. Maybe you don't get anyone anyway. Good retreat here by the charge, but still the pull position a little iffy. And now the fusion kind of throw away their own advantage, and they miss their pull hook as well. So once again, everything tilts back into the favor of the charge, who will have their pull hook first. So a couple good attempts there, and there we go. Now Rio goes for the pull, but this is after a couple of rotations, communication clearly breaks down here because Hotpa nowhere near in a position to actually hook this. And once again, if we just check in on the cooldowns, Poco and Sado, they're 3 seconds away. EQO still doesn't have a wall and he's occupied with something else here. So again, exceptional opportunity for the charge to just get a free pull hook, because there's not much counterplay on the side of Fusion, because there's no cooldowns. They're at a disadvantage cooldown wise. But Hotpa clearly not in sync here with his main tank, so he's just out of range. But also good distance management here by the Fusion. The guys who can actually get pull hooked hide, and the guys who have skills to protect themselves with Sado and EQO, they both use their Fortify and their Ice Block to block this hook. And once again, everything tilts back in the favor of Philly Fusion. Now, even though Happy wins this duel here, the fact that the fact that the front line has an advantage, because the front line does have an advantage here, you are essentially winning the fight here if you're the Fusion right now, simply because you have your cooldowns and you don't, and these guys once again have to give up space. That makes it so that Neptuno and EQO can come and help out here, because you know that you won't get pushed here. You know you won't have to commit resources to win the fight on the payload, which is what we can kind of see here as the Fusion reallocate resources. As you can see, Neptuno can go for a res, a little bit risky, but he can definitely get it off. And the charge have to wait for their cooldowns. They go for another pull hook, and this one is the one that finally lands. Counterwall by Nero here. Obviously, he's the only one who has his cooldowns up. Rio and Hotpa are still on cooldown, so he has to use this defensively. And it's very, very close to making this hook snap. If if Hotpa wasn't on the payload, this hook probably snaps. Just barely pulls Rhea over the top. And this is where, again, what the concept that we talked about, as soon as you hit that pull hook, now the resource, you have the advantage in resources most of the time. Obviously, Boombox did a nice sleep on Happy here. But again, this is the concept, right? These guys are fine taking this 2v4 because they have the cooldown advantage, and Philly Fusion can commit so many resources to winning the fight here, killing Happy, taking over this space, and then sandwiching the charge. So you can see how off of the status on the payload and off of the status in terms of shield war and bullhook combos, this kind of opens up for Fusion, because obviously if the charge were pushing heavily with an advantage, you can't really make this play if you're the Fusion. So Rio gets hooked. He gets, again, in terms of resources that we've just forced out, you have Shu's Nate coming in. Nero already obviously used his wall. You also got the nano. So you can see how many resources you've already forced out, whereas Boombox also actually doesn't have the resources, but Boombox is coming up on a nano, so obviously he's going to get a better nano here. Now, Poco, I do believe, dies here. Yeah, so Poco dies, but remember, just because of the advantage that the Fusion had here and leveraging that into a hook, the Fusion are winning the fight all over the over the high ground. So they've taken a ton of map control if you look at the positions. Again, Rhea tries to do something with the nano boost. Dragon comes out. You're also forced to use your Mei ice block a bit too early, whereas EQO has it. So you can see how this is a 5 versus 5, but the Fusion is so far ahead in the resource department here. They do have the nano, they do have the ice block, they have a lot of things to win this fight with. Chara obviously has to dodge the dragon simply because Carpe has that opening because they won the fight on the high ground. You can see how all of these things just slowly add up. And Chara obviously ends up dying because he ends up kind of sandwiched. Hotpa does kill EQO. And let's see, EQO and Nero both throw out their ultimates here on the payload. Now again, important to remember, when we're talking about resources, EQO still has his ice block. And really great reactions here by EQO to dodge the hook by Hotpa. He neutralizes the hook with this. And remember, Nero doesn't have such luxury. He's on a 10-second cooldown. And he's already used his wall, whereas EQO has it. Now, why is that important? Because EQO can use his wall to block off LOS on the ultimate of Nero. And as you may well know, the way the Mei ultimate works is if you break LOS and this, you don't have direct LOS between you and the Mei ultimate, you actually don't get frozen. You get slowed, but you don't get frozen. So with this wall, because EQO has it saved, because he's ahead in resources, he can take cover behind the payload and use his wall as well to avoid getting frozen here and actually convert a kill on Hotpa, which is what he does. Also gets the nano. Remember, Boombox still has it from the previous fight. And now the fight kind of falls apart for the charge. So you can see how all of this adds together, how just executing on a pull hook puts you in a good spot, and how and a lot of very creative ways in which both of these teams try to set up their combos, and how just a little bit of miscommunication can turn an advantage into a disadvantage. Now, this was also another fight that I kind of wanted to break down really quickly, just again, making a point of how teams use their Mei walls. So if you take a look here, Philly Fusion, they put down their shield, they wait for the next one. Let's see, there we go. Pull final comes out, they come out roughly at the same time. And EQO's wall comes out. So EQO's wall, because EQO's wall comes out first, And if you look at the positioning of Nero, there's no way from this position that Nero can actually counterwall this. So you're essentially in this duel, in this pull hook wall duel, because you've walled first, you've just accomplished what we talked about in the previous fight, right? Where EQO couldn't really counterwall because the wall came out first. So it's very important to be first with this, because now this puts you in a position where you can hook Hotba, and the wall is already blocking the healing and the counterwall from Nero. Whereas if Hotba hooks here, you know, might be easier for you to hide. And also you can see that Sato's pull was a tiny bit early, and again, as long as you're first with that pull hook and it hits, you get the advantage. You guys can see Nero is desperately trying to get LOS here, so maybe he can save Hotba, but he dies. And then that essentially leads to just a completely one fight, and the wall gets no value. Now, I want to fast forward a little to the next fight, because it, again, displays how important it is to maintain LOS on a good area. So, for some reason, the Fusion decided to hold on the ground instead on the high ground. I would think that it would be pretty good to hold here. You have a good choke point to defend, and EQO just has better wall angles, because as soon as you give up this high ground, if you take a look at this play, again, you're first with the pull hook, very good by Philly, nice placement, you push up and you get the hook. But now you don't have the luxury of really blocking him off, because now you've given high ground to Nero. If you actually maintain control here, if you're the Fusion, and forced the charge to go and fight from the ground, then you have this luxury and this advantage. Because let's take a look at what happens here. So Hotba gets pulled, gets nanoed, and the wall comes up, right? Because Nero does have LOS. If he doesn't have the luxury of playing on the high ground, he can't block this off. Now, obviously, you do commit the nano as well. You still get quite a bit of value here if you're the Fusion, but you don't necessarily convert the kill, which I do think you potentially could have. And now EQO's wall is kind of negated. He can't really wall. And even if he did wall, well, if he walls here, he's not really walling Hotba off from his support, because everyone has high ground, everyone maintains LOS from him, which is why it's so important to maintain high ground so that you can be first with these walls. So another quick little wrinkle that I wanted to break down, and an interesting sort of fight that happened here, I thought. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed the video and gain a little bit of understanding of how these teams potentially can utilize these resources of the Mei wall and the pull hook combos, and it's going to be interesting to see how the teams adapt to this and how they utilize the Mei. It does seem like it's going to be a pretty prominent pick for the rest of the stage, so we'll see what happens, and thank you for watching the video.